Hello and welcome to Payoff Pitch, Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. Today we've got a special long shots episode, and joining me is futures expert Jim Turvey from Roto Grinders. Before we jump in, as a reminder, we'll have best bets every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday on this feed, the Payoff Pitch feed, during the regular season. So make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcast and find us on Action Network's YouTube page. We also greatly appreciate any 5-star ratings and reviews. Make sure to check out Action Network's Discord as well to chop it up with action experts and fellow members. And with that, let's jump into our favorite long shots for the 2025 season. We're not going to determine a specific number or threshold in terms of what we would define as a long shot. For me, it's basically anything 20-1 or higher. But in terms of a division, 10-1 or higher, right? It depends on the category relative to everything else. We're going to start off with our favorite player prop long shots, though. And we've got a number of category leaders that we like for the season in terms of home run leader, runs leader, etc. Jim's got kind of a goofy one, so I'm going to let him start it off first. Not a market you see everywhere, but triples leader for this upcoming season. You're going with PCA from the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah, this is a weird market. Definitely not a market I'm betting into often. And to be honest, it's a little bit of a scary market. You look at some of the names at the top of the odds for this. It's Corbin Carroll, it's Bobby Wood Jr., some of the best players in baseball. But I'm intrigued by Pete Crow-Armstrong at 28-1 here. So he had 6 triples in 123 games last season. So, he's pacing for around 8. Usually a league leader is going to need for double digits, but, things break a little different. If you're in that range of projection around 8 to 10, that's going to mean you're in the contention for this league leader. He is third in all of baseball in sprint speed. Young player, just kind of breaking through last season. I'm really impressed. He's elevating the ball a bit more in spring training this season. That's great to see. There's a little Wrigley tidbit here that we'll touch on some other podcasts as well about how the wind was kind of blowing out and was giving more home runs for Wrigley last season. If that changes a little bit and knocks a few of those down, that's only going to help his triples, maybe hurt his home run total. But that's good news for this market as well. And then there's the speed aspect, the park factor. The Wrigley Field is the 5th best park factor for triples. I also am intrigued a little bit longer down the board here at Wensiel Perez in Detroit. He had 6 triples in even fewer games than Pete Crow-Armstrong last year. He's an even longer number. So I'm playing in this market that is indeed a very strange market, but the combination of speed, young player breaking out, what I've seen in spring training, and just the park itself, this 28-1 numbers feels a little bit long. So I'm going to be on Pete Crow-Armstrong, who's a player that I'm pretty intrigued with in general. So I wanted to get on him in a fun market here in the triples market at 28-1 at Caesars.
Also, not the best contact guy, but an excellent defender. So he'll probably be in the lineup every single day. They're not going to platoon him, switch him out for a better hitter just because the defense is so elite. So PCA should play as much as the Cubs are willing to let him play. I'm going to go ahead and go with the guy who's the leader in that market, but in a different category. I would assume Corbin Carroll is the favorite in the triples market.
Yes.
I like him as the major league's runs leader at 20-1 this year. He was awful to start the year last year, had some injuries coming into the season. It seemed like that shoulder injury from over swinging at the end of 2023 had carried over into 2024. He wasn't able to hit the ball hard. And then it seemed like he got healthier as the year went on. His mechanics came back. Ultimately, he ended up finishing 5th in MLB with 121 runs scored, but he was first over the second half of the season. And statistically, he is the best base runner in MLB in terms of advancing and taking extra bases. You combine in the steal aspect of his game, going first to third on base hits, going, first to home on doubles. Corbin Carroll just, advances extra bases, scores more runs, even in the percentage of times he's on base because of how good he is at advancing and taking extra bases. So I project him in 4th in runs scored this season, assuming everybody plays a fully healthy year. Obviously, there will be injuries ahead of him and behind him. Juan Soto, probably the biggest threat in this category, just in terms of likely production in that Mets lineup. But I think Carroll is the best number at 20-1. I would bet him down to 10-1. I project him to win this category about 10% of the time. And then I also like Corbin Carroll, steals leader, and MVP as well, if you just want to go up from there. I believe we'll get to one of those later on with one of Jim's props. Jim, go ahead and give me your hits leader prop for this year, because that is a player that we agree on. It's Vlad Guerrero Jr. at 11-1. He came very close to doing it last year.
Yeah, you talked about, what is the line of demarcation for long shots, and 20-1 is a good number. This is a little shorter. This is 11-1, but I do think it's one that, I'm fine going with, because he has such a combination of an insanely high floor with a really tantalizing ceiling at the same time. This is a guy who's missed, barely a handful of games his entire career since he debuted in Toronto. I know the vibes are a little weird up there in Toronto with Vlad in general, but this is a guy who just consistently is up there. We saw a 323 average from him last season. He kind of finally had that hitting breakout that we've been looking for a while. Finished third last season. He's projected by Oopsie second this season, but he's not in those top. There's 2 or 3, 4 names above him that are getting the respect in that market. I think he should be closer to that side of things in terms of projection. His XBA is the top 1%. If you go to his Savant page, it's just bright red everywhere. I mean, he mashes the ball, elite, swing speed, elite exit velocity, everything off of the bat is excellent. I loved your projections make this plus 958. And again, that's a relatively narrow margin, but the payoff is there and the edge is there in a market that I think is relatively flat. You don't see fully out of nowhere guys using the league in hits more often, whereas triples, there can be a little bit more variance. You have to be a fast player, but it's such a tight leaderboard. There's going to be a little bit more variance. Whereas with hits, you kind of know that the top names are going to be there if healthy. Vlad's proven his health time and time again. So he's the guy that I'm going to be backing in this market, even if it's a little bit shorter than some of the other long shots we're giving out this episode.
Yeah, really high floor for Vlad in terms of hits, RBI. I think he's a good bet for RBI leader as well, just because it's a very safe floor. From there, you just need upside variance, your teammates to outperform on the season. Hits, though, is all upon you, just getting your batted ball luck essentially down. And he was the second half hits leader last year. Before we move on to the home run leader market, because I'm actually curious if you have any thoughts on that market specifically, I want to turn to the saves leader market first, because you've got a long shot bet you like here. Ryan Walker for the Giants at 30-1. I saw an interview the other day. I can't remember what player it was. It might have been Luis Ariz. I don't think it was him necessarily, but they were asking him who was the toughest guy you faced last year. And he said, I don't even know his name, but it's the guy on the Giants who throws from the weird arm angle with the ridiculous slider. And they're like, Ryan Walker? Yeah, it's Ryan Walker. So I feel like most the common fans don't know Ryan Walker's name. It's just like a very generic name too, but this guy has absolutely nasty stuff, and it seems like he's overtaken the closer role from Camilo Doval.
Yeah, you laid it out really well there, and being a little bit of an unknown on a team that is getting a little bit overlooked. I was texting you and DeBundo about this the other day. I feel like the Giants are going to be the team. Everyone always says like I'm on Diamondbacks Island. Well, like all the smart people I know are on Diamondbacks Island. It's not really an island. It's more of like a decent metropolis. This, I think I might be on Giants Island. I don't think there's too many people out there that are really loving the Giants, but I'm pretty intrigued by them. It's a really tough division. But I really like who they brought in. I really like their offseason, and I really like some of the young talent. And Ryan Walker is one of those guys. He's a little bit unknown still. And like you said, I think the name doesn't help in terms of, flying under the radar there. But at 30-1, he was one of the best relievers in baseball last season. And he's behind a lot of names that have either health questions or other big names in the bullpen. He got the okay about a month ago before preseason even starts. He got we're going with Walker as the closer, even though Doval is there and has experience. I think as long as he is pitching well, he's going to hold on to that role. It's his to lose entirely, and it's not split like there's a pitcher we'll talk about later on the team I love there, the Diamondbacks, who's another reliever who's interesting, but there could be some split shares there. This guy who has control of it. I just have so many health questions about the guys above him. It's Edwin Diaz. Emmanuel Clase is one who I'm going to be betting his save and strikeout unders in part of the fear of his stuff is so nasty, but he kind of seems like there's some health stuff, potentially lingering there. Josh Hader's got age and health questions. Devin Williams, I think, has more health questions than maybe the market is baking in. So all these top arms, for me, it's Mason Miller, who I think, his stuff's electric, and pitchers with electric stuff are always going to be a little bit, nervous to be betting on. But I'm really high on him, but he's on the A's, and the A's, I probably aren't going to win all that many games, and his odds are way shorter than Walker. Walker, you're getting a guy who on a team I'm intrigued by at 30-1, who has a pretty good hold on the roll and has really nasty stuff. So the put it all together, and at 30-1, that's a saves leader I want to be behind.
Yeah, I think about 45% of wins end up with a save opportunity. So if you're going to win 75 games, that's only 35 save opportunities on a season. It's just not enough to get, to the 40 plus that you need probably to lead the league in saves. Giants should play a lot of tight games, so that sort of factors in too, right? The pitching-oriented teams who are more about run suppression, teams like the Brewers are going to get more save opportunities than teams who are more offensive-oriented. But an offensive-oriented team who I do like, but the closer is Felix Bautista, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery this season. He's about 25-1 for saves leader. I made him closer to 19-1. Fine betting him at 20-1 or better, just because I do think the Orioles are going to be very reliant on their bullpen. They have a win total near 90, about 87, 86.5. And that starting pitching, with the way it's falling apart, they're very much going to need their bullpen to be good in order to have a good season. Let's close out player props by talking about my favorite category, which is Major League Home Run Leader. I'm going with Juan Soto as my top bet in this category this year at 33-1. It's very evident his power is ticking upward. I believe prior to last season, his previous career high in expected home runs on a year was 31. He had 48 expected home runs last year, only hit 45. If he played every game in Cincinnati, per Baseball Savant, he would have hit 63 homers. Insane. But it's so obvious that Juan Soto is now growing into his power in his mid to late 20s. Peak power typically comes at age 28. So he maybe is even, a few years away from hitting 50 plus home runs, but I think it's kind of obvious he's going to get there at this point. I didn't think it was a couple of years ago, but the power really broke out. Career high in barrel rate, near 20% last year. Winning this category, for anybody other than Aaron Judge to win this category, you're probably going to need Judge to get hurt. Judge's barrel rate is absolutely ridiculous. If he plays 150 games, it's very hard for him not to hit 50 plus home runs. And then you need somebody to surpass him from that point, or you probably need him to get hurt, miss a month. The Yankees are dropping like flies right now. And as I've pointed out, wherever I can, you Google Aaron Judge toe, everybody tells you Aaron Judge's toe is something that's going to have to be managed, especially by Aaron Judge, for the rest of his career. So there is, a possibility going into any season, I think. I think there's a 33% chance he misses at least a month every single time he suits up for a season. He's now 32 years old. The Yankees, if they struggle a little bit, if it doesn't look like they're trending towards the playoffs, maybe they shut him down a little bit early. There's a lot of ways I think you can get Judge to not be the home run leader. And I think Soto is one of the few guys who actually has a chance to go from hitting in the 40s to hitting in the 50s this year. I think Yordan Alvarez, another one of those guys. If you want to go way down the list, O'Neal Cruz, I think has a chance to pop 40 plus at peak. I think he's starting to grow into his power a little bit more, but he's still ways away from there. Juan Soto, 33-1. My favorite bet here, Yordan Alvarez at 25-1. My other favorite bet, Jim, any home run leaders you like for the season? I didn't list any out here, but just any thoughts on that category?
Yeah, in terms of crazy long shots, I love O'Neal Cruz. I'm right there with you. It seems like one of those guys who, if a certain flip switches, he'll be up in that leaderboard. I tailed you on Soto when I read your article. I love that. It's funny, you go to some of the projections, like Oopsie, that really weighs some of the most advanced analytics we have, and it's basically just bet Aaron Judge and bet Shohei Ohtani. But I agree that both of those guys carry pretty significant injury risk. Ohtani, we're already seeing slow down on pitching stuff, and is that going to impact days off on batting? And I think the Dodgers have no need to press him. They're in this for one thing. They know they could stumble their way to 95 wins in a playoff spot. They just want the title. So there's no reason to press their guys. The Yankees, like you said, it's almost a flip side. It's almost like things are crumbling over there. Is there a chance that if the toe is bothering him and they're in fourth in what's a really good AL East division, did they kind of not rush him back and say, you know what, we want this for the long term? We're the Yankees. We usually go crazy and make additions, but let's not ruin our best player's career here. Let's make sure he's got a few more seasons in him. So I think with the health questions at the top, I'm definitely intrigued by Soto at 33-1 for a guy who, again, really high floor, but also has that, it's kind of like a Vlad situation where he's got the high floor, but also this really tantalizing ceiling that seems like it's just being scratched.
Let's move on to our favorite awards long shots for this season. We're going to cover some Cy Youngs. We're going to cover some managers in this category. I've also got a couple of long shot MVP picks in each league as well. Jim, I want to go ahead and start with you in AL Cy Young, because this is a player I co-signed on. Hunter Brown at 25-1 for American League Cy Young. I will be entering this in the Action app in the very near future. I'll have my awards piece dropping probably by the time this podcast is published on Wednesday of this week. So go ahead and give me Hunter Brown at 25-1 for AL Cy Young. Jim, tell me why.
Yeah, this is a guy who I played last season. If I didn't play Cy Young the season before, I was definitely intrigued by, he has the pedigree and the name, and it seems like he's slowly putting it together. We saw last season get off to a really bad start. He was, I think, 2-7. He had a 7.71 ERA, 5.52 FIP in those first 8 starts. I think there was a relief appearance in there as well. But the final 22 starts, basically the final 2/3 of the season, we're not talking about a small chunk of change. He had a 2.31 ERA, 3.04 FIP. If we take it just to the final 2 months, it's a 2.17 ERA, 2.82 FIP. 26-year-old, really kind of coming into his prime. A Houston team that's going to be relying on him more now. He's got good swing and miss stuff. It's not like the electric top of the chart swing and miss stuff, but he's really good at limiting hard contact. And I am just such a sucker for those types who they have enough swing and miss in their repertoire to be really solid in modern baseball. You really can't be rocking, like a seven Ks per 9 strikeout rate now at this point in baseball and really be an elite arm. But if you can get, over a strikeout an inning, and then you're truly elite at limiting that hard contact off the bat in an era where batters, that's all they're going for is lining it up, getting the sweet spot of the bat and getting those barrels. He's so good at preventing that. I really love that. So, I've looked in the past at what wins a Cy Young, and it really comes down to ERA basically. So he is in a little bit of a tough ballpark, but the rest of that division, he gets to pitch in Seattle a few times. That ballpark obviously helps. He'll be playing against the Athletics, who, that ballpark could be a little bit tricky, and that offense isn't terrible, but overall, I think the resume is there to carry over some of what he did in the last few months and post a sub-3 ERA and be right in the mix for this ERA crown and therefore potentially a Cy Young by the end of the season.
Yeah, I love that one. I'm going to go and give out my favorite National League Cy Young long shot, which is Christopher Sanchez at 50-1. Now, like AL MVP and a lot of the hits or hitter leader categories, I do think a Paul Skeens injury here is a big factor in whether or not anybody is able to overcome him for NL Cy Young. He's going to throw a ton of innings because the Pirates need him to, and those innings are likely to be extremely effective because I project him as the best starting pitcher in baseball. But if Skeens misses a month of time, maybe that's enough for somebody to overtake him. And keep in mind, he's still building up that workload from college. There was a point where he dipped last year in velocity and came back up. So we've already seen a dip with a big workload in the past, though he was able to recover from that. But Sanchez, I think, is my favorite long shot if Skeens does not win. I also like Spencer Schwellenbach at 50-1. But in terms of Sanchez, project him 11th for Cy Young voting this year going into the year. But that's behind 3 Dodgers players who may not get enough innings to ultimately qualify themselves for the award. You typically need about 170 innings to be in the conversation at minimum. Sanchez threw 180 last season, and he's super efficient. He gets a lot of ground balls. He could surpass 200 plus this year. Career 57% ground ball rate, less than 1 home run per 9 innings. So he's a weak contact guy, as Jim pointed out, but he added muscle this season, and he's throwing the ball harder in spring training. Average velocity, or not average velocity, but velocity has been sitting closer to 97, 98, where he averaged around 95 last season, and he also added a cutter to his repertoire. So I think Sanchez is a guy who clearly is on an upward trajectory for this year. And in terms of the rest of his career, I think this is going to be a guy who's going to be, part of the circle of trust of top end starting pitchers going forward. I think he's going to give the Phillies rotation a big upgrade alongside Zach Wheeler. Even though I don't love the Phillies necessarily this season in general, I think the bottom end of the rotation could be, a little bit hairy. Jesus Luzardo getting hurt. They don't really have many replacements besides from Andrew Painter to really call up into it. But I do think Sanchez is going to have a very good season. Drafting him in fantasy wherever I can. I'm very high on Christopher Sanchez this year. So 50-1 looks like a solid bet. I'm not, you don't have to size it normally. I'm probably having my sizing on NL Cy Young and NL MVP, considering Skeens and Ohtani. Just a little bit more fearful going against those guys. But 50-1 on Sanchez for NL Cy Young looks like a solid bet for me. I just want to mention, too, in terms of Skeens, because I was already talking about him, I'd rather bet Skeens at 65-1 for NL MVP, 50-1 for NL MVP, than I would at 2-1 for NL Cy Young. Skeens projects 4th in my NL wins above replacement projections going into the year. MVP very highly correlated to the wins above replacement leader, or at least guys who finish in the top 3 of WAR at the end of the year. He projects above Tatis, above Lindor, who are at 5.2 and 5 respectively. He's only behind Betts at 5.6, Soto at 6.5, and Ohtani at 8.6. I have Skeens at 5.4. So Skeens, big long shot to win NL MVP in his second year. Verlander did it. He won the AL Triple Crown. I think Skeens would probably have to win all three pitching categories and maybe get Ohtani hurt for a little bit of time too, so that he's not both pitching and hitting. Jim, going to toss it back to you. I want to hear about AJ Puck as your potential reliever of the year. This is not a category I typically look at either. It's not saves leader, it's reliever of the year. What did you find digging into, the relief pitcher award winner as opposed to the saves leader? Like, what's the difference there?
Yeah, this is basically the place to pick a really nasty reliever on a smart team who, doesn't mind splitting saves, because it almost always has to be a closer. There's one year that Devin Williams won as strictly a setup man, but you do usually need to have a decent number of saves. But beyond that, it really does go to the reliever with the smallest, the lowest ERA out there in each league. And it's AJ Puck is not he's a name that is maybe familiar to folks from when he was, breaking in. He was kind of a prospect for the then Oakland Athletics. And he kind of bounced around between starting and relieving, and he struggled with control, but he's really found his niche here. And he's in Arizona. So of course I'm going to, love him with the rest of my Diamondback plays here. But he was a pitcher who last season had the third best strikeout minus walk among relievers with at least 50 innings. He had the fourth best ERA among relievers with at least 50 innings, and the third best FIP. And actually among that crew, he actually had the highest BABIP of the bunch. So if things had broken, if he'd gotten the lucky season that some of the others had gotten, he really would have been right there in the conversation last year. Instead, we're getting him at 25-1. I think it's in part because there is a chance that he splits the role with Martinez there, kind of lefty-righty picking situations, which it hurts for a saves leader, which is why I moved over to this reliever of the year market. If he gets 20 saves, Martinez gets 15, he's never going to lead the league in saves at that number, but he could very much be in contention for this reliever of the year award if he is doing that alongside, 1.7 ERA, which seems low, but it really isn't all that much lower than last season, along with, the fact that, again, he had a little bit of less luck. He had the left on base rate was a little bit higher as well. So overall, if he gets things to break his way a little bit on a team that I really like in general, this number is just a little bit too long at plus 2,500. So another way I'll be playing Arizona this year.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look at the list of previous saves leaders and trying to find guys who are left-handed. So 2020, which is pandemic shortened, two left-handed relievers, Brad Hand and Josh Hader, led the league in saves. Beyond that, it's very limited in terms of finding lefties who actually lead their respective league in saves. It's very tough because you're almost always going to get platooned out of like one or two during the year in favor of a righty. When you're going against three righties or, rest, you may get brought in as a loogie in a bigger spot, right? In the eighth inning or the seventh inning against the other team's best left-handed bat. So it's actually very tough as a left-handed reliever to lead the league in saves because of the usage awkwardness. In terms of my final favorite awards long shot, I'm going to go with Wyatt Langford at 60-1 for AL MVP. I like this down to about 40-1, 30-1, 25-1. This guy changed his swing mechanics last year. Now, all the hype going into the year, Langford locked to win Rookie of the Year, generational talent. We saw him run the bases in April, and everybody was blown away by the sprint speed because we knew the power was there. We knew the defense, the eye. We knew all these skills were there. And then it turned out he was one of the fastest players in baseball, too. I think he's 96th percentile in sprint speed. This guy can fly around the bases, has really good defensive range. The throwing arm is the one tool that's a little bit questionable, seems a little bit more average. That was the knock on Mike Trout, too. Mike Trout was considered a 5-tool player, but the arm is, not quite up to snuff as the other tools. But we really saw Wyatt come on offensively in September. He was MLB's player of the month in September, or maybe the AL player of the month in September. 9 homers, 8 steals, crushed the ball, and it came after changing his swing mechanics at the end of the year. So this guy flew through the minor leagues, made it to the major leagues earlier than he should have, got pressed into full-time duty last year, kind of held his own, struggled a little bit, but mostly held his own for the first 5 months of the season, and then really seemed to turn on in September. And I think he could carry that forward into this year. There was I believe a hamstring strain or an oblique injury that he had. I think it was an oblique injury in spring training. He got himself back on the field. So he'll be ready for opening day. That was a concern as of a few days ago. It's not anymore. Langford, a long shot MVP in the American League at long odds. and then correlated bets on the Rangers to win the division, to win the pennant, etc. If you go back and listen to our AL West preview. Jim, any other awards? Oh, you have one more awards long shot. It aligns with your opinions on the Diamondbacks in general. That's Torey Lovullo to win Manager of the Year at 1,400.
Yeah, I love me some Diamondbacks this season, and so I'm going to go Manager of the Year, Torey Lovullo. I always struggle to say his name; it does not read as it is spelled almost. But Lovullo is a guy who he's been there for a little while now. And again, this team, what you're looking for with Manager of the Year is you want a team to exceed their preseason win total. You want them to make the playoffs. Neither of those are really surprises. When I dug into this, though, what I found that was surprising is it's really helpful to be in a small market. Since the turn of the century, since 2001, we've had over half of the winners of this award have been managers on teams with bottom 10 payroll. So there's kind of this sneaky factor where I think voters really like an underdog and positioning yourself as, this dragging a bottom 10 payroll. And now Arizona payroll wise isn't as low as like a Tampa Bay or Cleveland, who both have had several winners in this century, but they have had managers win it 3 times. They have that kind of plucky underdog feeling in part because they're, one of the newer teams that were added to baseball back in the day, but still newer than, a Yankees or a Red Sox who barely ever win this award. So if I combine the fact of how high I am on Arizona, which I have got one more award on them, so I'll save, the specifics of Arizona for that conversation. But Lovullo is a guy who's positioned really well, in terms of where he is in this market. He's got the 6th longest odds, which seems kind of crazy to me for a team that I think a lot of smart people are on. Combine it with the fact that he's got kind of that seemingly small market feel in Arizona, a guy who's been, established but not recognized. And I, put it all together. This is actually my favorite of all of these bets that I'm giving out on this pod here. I really love Torey Lovullo at this 14-1 number. I think he should be, in the top 2 or 3 in odds for this. And instead he's, in the bottom half, which I think is a little crazy.
With Major League Baseball right around the corner, now is the perfect time to get yourself an Action Pro account. Get real-time pick alerts from myself and other action experts, access to Sean Kerner's strikeout prop projections, and more. Right now, subscribers can get $20 off a year of Action Pro at actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off an entire year. So you'll be covered for March Madness, NBA, the upcoming baseball season, plus next college football and NFL season. So don't wait. Visit actionnetwork.com/pro right now and use promo code POD20 to get $20 off of an annual subscription for Action Pro. Let's move on to our favorite long shots for teams in terms of divisions, pennants, World Series, maybe any other angles we might be interested in. I'm going to give out one for each of those 3 categories. But Jim, I'm going to let you keep going with the Diamondbacks love. D-backs to win the World Series at 30-1. Tell me why.
This is an absolute broken record. This one, I swear there are thoughts I have on this season beyond just that I love the Diamondbacks. But yes, I had to come in with one World Series winner. I think you got to come in with one. Plant your flag. I'm going with the Diamondbacks 33-1. If there's 2 things I love in baseball, it's pitching depth and batters who can take walks. And this Arizona team, they were second to the Yankees in terms of strikeout minus walk on the batter side of things last season. They led all of baseball in runs scored last season by over 40 runs. That blew my mind when I was looking through that last year. More than the Dodgers, more than the Yankees. They scored the most runs in baseball, which seems kind of crazy. I don't think many people, without looking it up, would have known that. But they really have a truly elite offense. And with a couple of guys who I think actually are just kind of scratching the surface. Corbin Carroll, MVP, is one that I'm going to be joining you on. I think his ceiling is incredibly high. I love Moreno behind the plate. I think he's the type of guy who, I don't always weigh kind of the softer side of things like leadership and clubhouse and all that, but he kind of seems like he is that dude already. And he's kind of it's perfect for, a young catcher to kind of establish themselves in that role on a team like this that's potentially breaking out. Really love him there. Marte and Carroll as a combo are kind of one of the more underrated duos in baseball. We think of duos in basketball much more often, and they do drive success more in basketball. But that 1-2 at the top of the lineup and kind of the 2-3 spots of the lineup is among the best in baseball. But then really what this comes down to for me is the pitching depth. I absolutely love the pitching depth. They have about 7-8 arms that are like really, really viably solid pitchers. And at the top of the rotation, their top 3, if we look at Eno Sarris's health ratings that he has out there, the top 3 all have a 90+ injury rating. So they have healthy, stable, really good arms. And in modern baseball, I mean, we've seen already that people are just dropping like flies. To have that pitching depth is just, of incredible import. I think that the biggest thing here is they're kind of hiding behind the Dodgers. All their numbers are deflated a little bit because of the LA part of it, which is totally fair. Playing in a division with the Dodgers sucks, and it makes it really hard to grab that first round bye. It makes it hard to, you got to play them a bunch. But overall, I think this team is almost as talented as any in baseball, and getting them at 33-1, when once you get to the postseason, anything can happen. And they have that pitching depth. They, are more likely than many other teams to arrive in the postseason with healthy arms. And, some of those guys come postseason. My only real question is with this team is the kind of the middle part of the bullpen. If those arms are healthy, those guys just become the amazing relievers that fill in the spots a little bit for that postseason run. So I promise there are takes beyond Arizona, but I really do love this Arizona team. So I'm going to make my final big play here on Arizona 33-1 to win the World Series.
No, I completely agree on the pitching depth. Ryan Nelson, who was like completely busting out at the end of last year, can't even make their opening a roster. It seems like he may start in AAA. But keep in mind, the middle of the bullpen, back end of the bullpen being a concern, that starting pitching depth could be reconsolidated into the bullpen come October. So I love this D-backs team. I think they're a very safe bet to make the playoffs. Once you get there, you may still get, decent numbers on them to win the NL pennant or win the World Series from that point. Yeah, if you like the D-backs as much as Jim does going into the season, ladder it all the way up. First round bye, potentially, ahead of the Dodgers. I'd recommend betting the first round bye as opposed to betting them to win the NL West. We talked about this on the NL West pod that we recorded on Monday with Mike Calabrese, but, there's always a better way to bet something, and really doesn't make much sense to bet the D-backs to win the NL West if you can get a better number on their first round bye. If they surpass the Dodgers, they very likely just had a ridiculously good season like the Giants did a few years ago, where they both happened to win 100 plus games and the D-backs surpassed them. So yeah, D-backs ladder all the way up if you like Arizona. In terms of the three bets that stood out to me, divisionally, pennant, World Series, that I think are viable long shots that could actually pull it off. Blue Jays at 15-1 to win the American League East. I'm at 6.5% on Toronto, which is about plus 1450. Pacoda is closer to, I said 6.5%. Yeah, Pacoda is closer to 15% on the Jays to win this division. That is about plus 560. And the public projections average out to around 10%. So Toronto is technically a value bet in the AL East, but you look at the way all the injuries are piling up on the teams ahead of them. The Yankees have gone through in depth, but probably now no Garrett Cole for the entire year, and likely no Luis Hill for at least half the season, maybe more. You're looking at Clark Schmidt as your number 3 starter, Marcus Stroman and figuring it out behind him for number 4 and number 5. Devin Williams, as you mentioned, an injury concern. The back issue, I think, is likely to crop up at some point again. I talked about Aaron Judge's toe. Jazz Chisholm has a UCL injury coming into the season that may force him to move off at third base. Also, when has Jazz ever stayed healthy prior to last year, too? There's a lot of downside with this Yankees team. Baltimore, Grayson Rodriguez injury, huge holes in the rotation. Tampa Bay may have to sell the team, probably not going to invest anything else into it. And the Red Sox, I do think, are the team that ultimately takes it. Wait 7 days into the season to bet the Red Sox, because that's when they come off of their road trip to Texas and Baltimore. They come back, they start playing the White Sox 6 times in the next week. So I think the Red Sox, targeting them about a week into the season, probably the best way to play the AL East. But preseason, Jays at 15-1 to win the division, I think is absolutely viable, and probably the best way to play them at this point now that their win total has gone up. That rotation is deep. They have 5 number 2, number 3 type starters. Nobody I'm absolutely in love with as an ace, but it should be effective pitching every single day. They play good defense, and their lineup may actually be a little bit underrated if Bo Bichette gets back to where he was a couple of years ago. So Jays is a long shot to win the AL East division. I think all 5 teams can win, worth an investment. But of the teams in that division, I think the Rays are actually a better pennant poke at 30-1. I'd rather bet the Rays to make a pennant run than I would the Jays. If you put those 2 rosters in the postseason, you tell me everybody's fully healthy, which do you think is more upside to make a run with the talent there? I would say Tampa Bay all day, just because the high end, the pitching to me is a little bit more high end. McClanahan, Boz, Rasmussen, I think that gets you to Taj Bradley. That gets you to another level beyond where Toronto's pitching can go. The offense isn't quite as good, but I'm going to take pitching like that, of that caliber, all day in the postseason. The question is whether they can get there healthy. But the Rays 30-1 to win the AL pennant, I don't think is out of the question at all. And then a World Series value bet, the Cubs at 30-1. I'm close to plus 1650 on the Cubs at about 6%. Pacoda is closer to 8% and 15-1. The remaining public projections around 3% and 35-1. So if you trust me, if you trust Pacoda, there's value on the Cubs. It's a team that's very likely to make the playoffs, unless one of the other NL Central teams is good enough that they hop them and maybe put them in the wild card bubble. But the NL Central should be there for the taking for the Cubs this year. They have the deepest roster. They have the most talent in that division. And if they're going to make the playoffs comfortably, there's probably value in advance on them to win the World Series. And I'd rather bet their World Series odds than the pennant. If a team is going to beat the Dodgers, you should probably have their World Series ticket, because they've already taken out the best team on the board in order to get there. So Jays AL East 15-1, Rays AL pennant 30-1, Cubs World Series 30-1, I think are all viable. The only one I bet of those three is Rays AL pennant, but I'm really considering the Jays bet, considering the way the AL East is dropping off coming into the year. It seems like a completely wide open division, and I think people are very asleep on Toronto right now. Jim, let's move on to favorite remaining long shots, and then we'll wrap things up. Got another manager of the year bet you want to give out? You mentioned Corbin Carroll, NL MVP at 4-1. So any additional thoughts there? Then you've got a really cool way to bet on a champion coming out of the NL West, which actually gives you some leverage on the Dodgers. So go ahead and wrap up with your favorite remaining long shots.
Yeah, I'll keep these relatively brief. These are the ones that, I had all the thoughts on the others, but these are kind of like quick hitters here. Bruce Bochy, manager of the year at 13-1. Honestly, this kind of came off the back of your love of the Rangers. They were a team that I kind of overlooked when I was doing my preseason prep. Heard you talk through, heard some other smart folks talk through. I was like, you know what? Maybe I got to get in on them on some way. And I think that this manager of the year of the year award for Bochy is the way to do it. Texas weirdly almost has this feel of a small market team. It's they're like one of the top 5 biggest cities in the country, but something about there's something about that team that kind of keeps that underdog vibe going. I don't know if it's the World Series losses. I don't know if it's that they aren't like Boston feels bigger, even though obviously Dallas is a much bigger city than Boston, but Boston has the history and all that. So Texas kind of plays that underdog role. So it kind of fits along with the, getting to the playoffs, overperforming win total, and, kind of underdog type market for the Rangers. That's at 13-1. Another one where it seemed like the odds on favorites were much shorter, and Bochy should have been in that top tier. So I like that one for AL manager of the year. Talked about Corbin Carroll, MVP 40-1. That one's basically covered. Arizona and him scratching the surface, looking pretty good in preseason, in spring training. He did have a little bit of a back thing, but seems to have bounced back from that already. So I think he should be able to unlock, a really high floor. You're really looking at WAR. He brings speed on the bases. He brings elite defense. He brings on base. That's a pretty good trio of things to have when you're looking to get WAR. And then finally, NL West to win the title, you can get it plus 220. I wanted some way to get in on the Dodgers. And of course, I had to end this pod by mentioning the Diamondbacks one more time. It also gives you a little bit of Diamondbacks and San Francisco Giants. I talked about that during the Ryan Walker saves. I don't think the Giants are winning a title, but you never know. And it throws all those teams in, and the Padres, even theoretically, if they zag and suddenly are buying, they do have some talent, and we've seen them in the postseason. So it gives you a way to get on the Dodgers at almost the Dodgers price, but throws in, 3 other teams that are, at least going to be vaguely intriguing, especially Arizona. I find, very interesting. So I wanted to get some Dodgers share in some way, and I thought this was the best way NL West to win the World Series at plus 220.
Yeah, I like that one. Really like the Bochy manager of the year. I bet Texas to get a first round bye at 4-1. If they get a first round bye, Bochy has to be in the top 2 for manager of the year voting, right? So 4-1, 13-1, basically betting like on the same thing at that point. Yeah, that's a really sharp way to go ahead and bet on Texas at longer odds. The one manager of the year bet I made was Terry Francona at 7-1. Kind of similar reasoning with that. When you just compare like the Reds' odds to win the division, the Reds' odds to make the playoffs. If the Reds win the division, Terry Francona is probably going to be NL manager of the year. 7-1 versus plus 550. Basically kind of betting on the same thing there. And I think he also has a pretty good chance to win it if they just make the wild card. Projected win total of about 78.5. I think nobody expects the Reds to make the playoffs this season. If they end up hopping one of the Phillies or the Mets or the Braves or the Diamondbacks, to get into a playoff spot, which they would need to do, or they beat the Cubs, win the division, I think those are all viable outcomes for Francona winning Manager of the Year. Frankly, if they win 85 games, just miss out, but they're really exciting. I think he'll be in the conversation as well. Coming off of illness, don't overlook that fact, right? The sentimental vote from the public. He's also been a two-time AL Manager of the Year, maybe 3, and he would join the exclusive list of managers who had won Manager of the Year in both leagues. Don't overlook the aspect of history either. He's a beloved guy. I think people will vote for him on top of whatever the Reds do on the field for those 2 reasons. To get him, Manager of the Year in both leagues, and because he's coming back from illness, twice now coming back from illness. So Terry Francona, the one Manager of the Year I targeted, but that Bochy Manager of the Year, I'll probably join you on. The last guy I want to touch on in terms of long shot bets, because I can't come on a long shot pod and have Yordan Alvarez at 25-1 in 2 different categories and not talk about my guy. So Yordan's going to be DHing more this year. I think that's huge for him, not having to run around in the outfield, not getting his knees banged up. He is a guy with knee, ankle injuries. The legs don't seem to hold up very well under his huge, powerful frame. But if you look at the StatCast metrics, the leap is well overdue here in terms of him jumping up to 320 average, 45 plus home runs. It's coming. It's coming at some point in the next couple of years. The question is when. I project him about 6th in RBI, 4th in home run, about 6 to 7% to win either of those categories. So RBI leader, home run leader, both at 25-1, good with either bet, down to about 16-1, 15-1 respectively. Yordan Alvarez long shot odds, continue to bet his props. These are longer than we got last year. I think we bet RBI last year at 15-1. Astros lineup not quite as good as it was last year, but it's not like his projections, his range of outcomes changes too much. His offensive production is going to be mostly on his shoulders. Jim, before we wrap things up, I believe we touched on all the bets that we had on the sheet, but any other thoughts, team thoughts? I know this is your first appearance with me on the pod this year. So aside from the D-backs, any big picture team thoughts, teams you're targeting, fading going into the year? What else you got?
No, honestly, not too many big things. I've been loving listening to the previews, kind of filling in. I'm going to be doing a lot of projections for Roto Grinders for the baseball season this year. So I'm going to be really in the weeds. So I'm going to be giving out picks on the day-to-day basis, but me, the futures are always my favorite. So I'm looking forward to seeing if we cash some of these long shots. Last year on the pod, gave out Bobby Witt Jr., hits leader 34-1. That was able to cash, which was excellent. So hopefully there's a winner mixed in this bunch of long shots here.
Yeah, love that Bobby Witt hits leader last year. I like him. It's not a long shot, but I like him at 8-1 this year. I project him as the major league leader. I think I made his line closer to plus 650. I'll end up talking about that on our player props episode. But if you just want one hits leader bet, I think Bobby Witt, a pretty safe way to do it. If you want 2, I think you could mix in Vladito as well. I would go ahead and avoid Luis Arias. His odds have finally been slashed to the point where they should. And he's also a pending free agent. He could get traded to a contender and then start platooning against left-handed pitching, and will lose plate appearances and hits as a result. So just keep those things in mind, and that'll do it for this episode of Payoff Pitch. Make sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app to follow all of our action experts, and so you can track your own picks. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And for Jim Turvey, I'm Sean Zerillo. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Payoff Pitch.